My name is Marcus Rowan. I'm 38 years old, and my own family sued me, trying to steal my inheritance and paint me as an unstable veteran. They had no idea I was about to expose them for treason. Before I tell you about the moment the judge stopped the trial and everything changed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who's listening. 6 months after my father, Richard Rowan, passed away, I received a sterile email summoning me to a family meeting. It was from Gerald Hayes, our family's lawyer for over 30 years, a man who used to bounce me on his knee at company picnics. The location itself was a red flag. It wasn't at the family home, the sprawling brick house on Maple Drive where my mom's baking scent once filled the air. Instead, it was at his downtown office, a place of corporate letterhead and billable hours. The conference room air was heavy with the scent of old leather and even older money. But all I felt was a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the aggressive air conditioning. My mother, Elizabeth, sat bolt upright in a plush leather armchair, her posture ramrod straight, knuckles white as she gripped her purse. Her gaze was meticulously fixed on a bland corporate painting on the far wall, anywhere but at me. My younger brother James was sprawled next to her, a picture of casual arrogance in his perfectly tailored suit. He ran a hand through his hair, a little smirk playing on his lips as he caught my eye. Beside him, his wife Vanessa, a study in practiced grace, rested her hand delicately on his knee. She offered me a sad, sympathetic smile, the kind you'd give a dog you were about to put down. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Gerald began, his voice a smooth, professional purr that had lost all its former warmth. He slid a thick-bound stack of papers across the polished mahogany desk. It landed in front of me with a soft, final thud. "As you know, settling your father's estate has been rather complex." I didn't speak, just stared at the document. It was an inch-thick behemoth of legal jargon held together by a dark blue binder, looking less like a legal document and more like a tombstone. James leaned forward, the picture of a concerned son taking charge. "Look, Mark, we'll cut to the chase. Dad left behind some significant debts, more than any of us realized." He sighed, a theatrical sound of immense burden, as if the weight of the entire Rowan legacy was on his shoulders alone. Vanessa and I have been working around the clock with Gerald to find a way to save what's left. Vanessa chimed in, her voice a soft melodic tool of manipulation. "What James is trying to say, Marcus, is that we found a solution, a difficult one. It involves restructuring the assets to shield them from creditors. To protect the main house and the family trust, we have to consolidate things." I finally found my voice, came out low and steady, a parade ground calm that was a habit from 2 decades in the military. "Consolidate how?" Gerald cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "The most significant liability is the mortgage on the family home. It's substantial. To protect it, we need to transfer the property into a new corporate entity." He tapped the thick binder with a manicured finger. "This is a standard legal procedure for asset protection. It's all in there." I stared at him, my mind racing. The mortgage. I knew with the certainty of a man who had checked his own bank statements that there was no mortgage. I had paid it off myself in full 5 years ago. I remembered the exact moment. I was in a dusty command tent in the middle of nowhere, the air hot and tasting of sand. I used a secure satellite link to wire the final payment of $62,000, the last of my deployment savings. It was a silent gift to my parents, a way for me to contribute when I couldn't be there for Christmases or birthdays. I never told them it was me. I just let them believe my dad's investments had a good year. "There is no mortgage," I said, my voice flat, a simple statement of fact. A flicker of raw annoyance crossed James' face before he expertly smoothed it over. "Marcus, with all due respect, you've been away. You don't understand the complexities of Dad's finances. There were other loans, a home equity line of credit. It's complicated." A blatant lie. I could feel the dishonesty radiating from him. I looked to my mother, a silent plea in my eyes. "Say something." "Right. Tell the truth." "Nothing." She just continued her intense study of the abstract painting on the wall, her jaw set like concrete. "So, what do you need from me?" I asked, my gaze locking. On to James. Your signature, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She leaned forward and flipped to the last page of the binder, pointing to a yellow tab. It's just a formality, really, to make the transfer clean. We're signing away your direct claim on the primary residence. And in return, we've set up a small trust for you, a token of our appreciation for your service, and to help you get on your feet. Token. My own family was trying to buy me out of my own home, the home I had secretly saved, with what was probably a fraction of my rightful inheritance. The condescension in her voice was staggering. I'm not signing a single page until I have my own lawyer review this, I said, my voice as cold as the chill I felt in the room. The atmosphere didn't just get cold, it went arctic. James's mask of civility didn't just slip, he tore it off. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Fine, be that way, he sneered, his voice laced with the same arrogant, dismissive tone he'd used on me since we were kids playing. In the backyard? Always have to be difficult, don't you, Marcus? Suit yourself. We're moving forward with or without you. But don't come crying to us when you're left with absolutely nothing. That was it. The final veil was lifted. This wasn't a business decision born of necessity. This was a hostile takeover. As I stood up and walked out of that office, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, I had no idea that a simple brick house was just the public face of a betrayal, so deep and so dark, it would threaten to swallow me whole. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of my hometown felt alien, the lights of other cars like the eyes of strangers. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of order and quiet, felt like a cage. I tossed my keys on the counter with a clatter. That sounded unnaturally loud in the silence and sank onto my couch. The smug look on my brother's face burned into the back of my eyelids. This wasn't a new feeling. It was the same old story of my family, just with higher stakes and more lawyers. My mind, seeking an anchor, drifted back 20 years to the summer. I turned 18. The air in Virginia, that time of year, is a physical thing. Thick and heavy with humidity, and the night was alive with the humming of cicadas. My duffel bags were packed and sitting by the front door, a silent testament to my imminent departure for basic training. I was a knot of conflicting emotions, thrilled to be escaping the confines of our small town, terrified of the unknown, but resolute in my decision to become something more than just James's quiet older brother. James, who was a popular junior in high school, had spent the entire day making a performance of my departure. He'd followed me around the house making parachute noises, calling me G.I. Joe with a mocking salute. Bet you wash out in a week, he'd said with a laugh, and my mother had laughed with him. She fussed over him, ruffling his hair, her favorite son, the charming one, the one who stayed. My father Richard was a different story. He was a man carved from oak, hard, silent, and difficult to read. He rarely praised either of us, but his disappointment with my quiet, introverted nature was a constant, unspoken presence, especially when compared to James's easy social grace. But that night, my last night, was different. I was standing on the front porch, trying to soak in a final moment of peace. Watching the fireflies blink on and off in the growing darkness, the screen door creaked open and my dad came out. He didn't speak for a long minute, just stood beside me, the scent of his Old Spice aftershave familiar and comforting. We watched the fireflies together. Then, his voice low so it wouldn't carry back into the house, he said, "It's a tough road you've chosen, son." "I know, Dad," I managed, my own voice tight. He put a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. It was a rare, powerful gesture of affection, and it felt like an anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. "You've got a spine of steel, Marcus. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." He paused, his gaze drifting back toward the brightly lit living room window, where I could see the silhouette of James holding court with my mother. "Go out there and become the man that boy in there will never be." He didn't say it with malice. He said it like a statement of fact, a sad, heavy truth he had carried for years. It was the closest he ever came to telling me he was proud. It was a secret acknowledgement, a private passing of a torch that I didn't even know he was holding. I carried those words with me through every grueling mile of basic training, every lonely night in a foreign land. They were my shield, my proof that I was on the right path. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that we weren't alone. As my dad turned to go back inside, I saw a flicker of movement from the shadows by the screen door. It was James. He'd been standing there in the dark, listening. The look on his face in that split second before he melted back into the house wasn't just the sting of a teenage insult. It was a deep, cold, and venomous hatred. It was the look of a boy who had just heard his own father pronounce him a permanent failure. Now, sitting in my silent apartment 2 decades later, the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about a house. This wasn't about debts or a complex estate. This was about that moment on the porch. This was James's long-delayed, meticulously planned revenge. He wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. He was trying to retroactively rewrite history, to dismantle my father's final judgment. He needed to prove that he was the successful one, the smart one, the one who won in the end, and that I was the one who would be left with nothing. The bitterness of that realization was like acid in my throat. My own brother and my mother, who must have known the truth about the mortgage, stood by and let it happen, a willing accomplice to his poisonous resentment. The fight for my father's house had just become a fight for my father's memory and for the one piece of his approval I had ever truly owned. By the next morning, the fog of shock and wounded anger had burned away, replaced by a state of mind I knew well: mission focus. The military doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to think, how to assess a threat, analyze your enemy's capabilities and intentions, and formulate a plan of action. My family thought I was just Marcus, the quiet, emotionally distant son they'd always known. They had conveniently forgotten I was also Major Rowan, United States Army Cyber Command, retired. I spent 20 years learning how to operate silently, behind enemy lines. My own family had just designated themselves the enemy. Rule number 1 of asymmetric warfare: never confront a superior force head-on without intelligence. Storming back to that office or my mother's house to yell and accuse would be emotional, satisfying for a moment, and ultimately tactical suicide. It would only give them exactly what they wanted: more proof that I was unstable and aggressive. I needed facts. I needed data. I needed to build a case so airtight that it would suffocate their lies. I picked up a burner phone I kept for emergencies, a habit that never quite fades, and called Lieutenant Mike Daniels. Mike was a decade younger than me, a genuine wizard with data who saw the world in code and algorithms. He was my right hand. Man, for my last 5 years in the service, the guy who could pull a needle of data out of a haystack the size of the internet. More importantly, he was loyal to the bone. "Mike," I said, my voice deliberately level and calm, "I've got a personal situation. I need a favor. Completely off the books." "Name it, sir," he said immediately. No hesitation, no questions. That was Mike, a soldier's loyalty. "I need you to run a deep dive digital audit. 2 entities, a company called Stone Ridge Properties LLC, and another one, my brother's firm, Stone Ridge Tech. I want to know everything: corporate registrations, financial traffic, server locations, data transfer logs, all of it. But the key is this has to be a ghost operation. 0 footprint, no ripples. They can't ever know anyone is looking. Consider it done," Mike said, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "I'll build a sandboxed monitoring system using a few ghost servers I keep for rainy days. They won't see a thing." "What am I looking for?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, the uncertainty gnawing at me. "Just anything that doesn't look right. It's anything that smells bad. Start with the property company." While Mike went to work in the digital trenches, I started my own reconnaissance in the physical world. Public records are a powerful tool if you know where to look. It didn't take long. A few clicks on the county clerk's website, and my blood ran cold. The deed to the house on Maple Drive, my childhood home, had been officially transferred to Stone Ridge Properties LLC 3 weeks ago. The transaction was signed by my mother, Elizabeth Rowan, and notarized by our family lawyer, Gerald Hayes. My name was nowhere on the document. The sale price listed was $1, $1 single dollar. My stomach clenched. They hadn't just planned this. They had already done it. The meeting at the lawyer's office, the thick binder, the condescending offer was all a charade. A piece of theater designed to get me to retroactively sign away my rights to provide them with legal cover for a theft they had already committed. A few days later, the next phase of their attack arrived. A uniformed courier knocked on my door, handing me a thick, heavy, certified letter. I didn't need to open it to know what it was.
Oh.
My hands were perfectly steady as I tore the seal. The words printed in stark black ink seemed to jump off the page. James Rowan, Vanessa Rowan, and Elizabeth Rowan, plaintiffs. V. Marcus Rowan, defendant. They had sued me. The allegations were a breathtaking work of fiction. They accused me of emotional abuse, of attempting to extort money from my grieving mother, of threatening the stability of the family estate. They twisted my refusal to sign their documents into an act of aggression. They were using my own military service against me. Paragraphs artfully crafted by Victoria Chambers, their shark of a lawyer, to imply that my time in combat had left me damaged, unstable, and greedy. It was a brilliant, vicious, and perfectly executed preemptive strike. I laid the lawsuit on my kitchen counter, right next to the printout of the $1 property transfer. The battlefield was clear, they thought. They had me surrounded, cut off, and besieged. They thought I was just a soldier out of my depth in their civilian world of legal traps and corporate shell games. They were about to learn that a soldier, when cornered, is at his most dangerous. The lawsuit was a punch to the gut, but it also had an unintended effect. It sharpened my focus. Their strategy was now laid bare. They wanted to paint me as the villain in a story they controlled from start to finish. My only way out was to find a truth so powerful, so undeniable, that it would shatter their carefully constructed narrative. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. The military teaches you that even the best soldier is only as good as his team. My first call was to a name I hadn't spoken in years, but one that was synonymous with absolute incorruptible diligence: Sophia Chin. Sophia was a forensic accountant, but calling her that was like calling a Navy SEAL a swimmer. She was a financial detective, a bloodhound who could sniff out a single fraudulent dollar buried in a mountain of offshore accounts and shell corporations. We had worked a case tangentially a few years back involving a defense contractor skimming millions from a government contract. She was the one who found the money. She was relentless. She was brilliant. And she did not suffer fools. I met her at a small, anonymous coffee shop in a part of town neither of us frequented. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar. I laid out the lawsuit and the property transfer documents on the small table between us. I watched her as she read, her eyes sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. When she finished, she looked up at me, her gaze piercing. "This is a story," she said, her voice crisp and a poorly written one. "What's the real story, Marcus?" "I paid off the house 5 years ago." "Anonymously," I said, my voice low. "I have the wire transfer records. There was no mortgage to be a liability." A small, grim smile touched the corner of Sophia's lips. It was the smile of a predator catching a scent. "That's the loose thread," she said, tapping the lawsuit with a fingernail. "A lie that big, that easily disproven, means one of two things. Either they're incredibly stupid, or they're hiding something much, much bigger than a house." "Your brother runs a tech company, Stone Ridge Tech," I confirmed. "And his wife, Vanessa, runs a charity. A non-profit for veterans, of all things. It's called the Center for Restorative Futures." That grim smile widened slightly. A tech firm and a charity. The classic 1-2 punch for creative accounting and money laundering. "I'm in," she leaned back, crossing her arms. "But my services are not cheap. My retainer is substantial." "Whatever it costs," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I was about to drain my life savings, the money I had carefully put away from my salary and deployment bonuses. The money I'd earmarked for a quiet, peaceful future to fight my own family for a house I had already paid for. The irony was suffocating. While Sophia began her deep dive into the labyrinth of my family's finances, Mike's silent monitoring started to yield results. He called me late one night, his voice tight with the thrill of the hunt. "Marcus, I've got something," he said. "Weird, but it's consistent. There's a constant low-level data stream from your brother's main company server to an encrypted offshore host. Very well hidden, routed through half a dozen proxies. But the weird part is the source of the initial data packets. They aren't just coming from his office network. Some are being routed through a separate, less secure server registered to his wife's charity. My hand tightened on my phone. What kind of data? I can't crack the encryption yet. It's military grade, which is a huge red flag on its own. But the file sizes are consistent. Small, uniform packets sent at irregular intervals throughout the day. If I had to guess, it looks like records, personnel files, maybe social security numbers, service dates, that kind of thing. A veteran's charity, encrypted military-grade data streams. My mind started connecting dots I didn't even know were there. This was feeling less and less like a simple case of inheritance fraud. It was starting to feel dirty. The final piece of this initial puzzle came not from a computer screen, but from a plain manila envelope slipped under my apartment door late one night. No return address, no note, just my name typed on the front. My training screamed at me to be cautious, but my gut told me to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of an internal memo from a local credit union. It was a loan application denial for a man named Thomas Grant. Reason for denial? Excessive debt-to-income ratio. Multiple recent credit inquiries from institutions with which the applicant has no prior relationship, scribbled at the bottom in messy, angry-looking handwriting were 5 words that changed everything. Vanessa Rowan's charity is a lie. I didn't know who Thomas Grant was or who the anonymous sender was who had risked themselves to get this to me. But I knew one thing for sure. My family's betrayal wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. I was standing at the edge of a rabbit hole, and it was time to jump in head first. Just when I thought I was starting to build a counter-offensive. In the shadows, my family launched a full frontal assault in the brightest arena imaginable. The court of public opinion. They took the fight public, and they did it with brutal efficiency. It started with a segment on the local evening news. I was at my kitchen table going over the preliminary data Mike had sent, a headache pounding behind my eyes. My phone buzzed. It was a link from an old army buddy. The text with it just said, "Mark, what the hell is this?" I clicked the link. The news station's logo appeared, followed by a somber-looking anchor. Headline scrolling at the bottom of the screen read, "Hero Family Tragedy. Decorated veterans sued by grieving mother." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. And there they were. My mother, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her face a mask of sorrow. James's arm was wrapped protectively around her shoulders, his expression grave and concerned. And Vanessa, sitting beside them, the very picture of supportive, elegant grace. "We love my son," my mother said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "We just want what's best for Marcus." His time in the service, all those tours, it changed him. He's not the same boy who left home. We're so worried about his mental state. Then James spoke, his voice deep and steady, a son forced to be the rock for his family. "This has never been about money. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand. This is about getting my brother the help he so desperately needs." It's become aggressive, paranoid. When he started making threats, trying to get money from our mother right after our father's funeral, we knew we had to step in. "This lawsuit," he sighed, looking directly into the camera, "this is a last resort. It's a legal tool to protect our mother and to get Marcus into a stable therapeutic situation." It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a public assassination of my character, delivered with hugs and tears. They were using my 2 decades of service, the very thing I was most proud of, as a weapon against me. They were expertly planting the seed. I wasn't a hero. I was a damaged, unstable veteran suffering from PTSD, trying to steal from my poor, widowed mother. The story exploded. It was picked up by online news aggregators, local blogs, and veterans forums. The comment sections were a cesspool of vitriol. Half the people were calling me a disgrace to the uniform. The other half were defending me, but it didn't matter. The narrative was set. My family had fired the first shot, and it was a cannonball. Then they brought in the expert to legitimize their claims, A woman named Dr. Patricia Morgan, psychologist with a comforting smile and authoritative demeanor, appeared on a popular morning talk show. She never mentioned my name, of course. She was too smart for that. She just spoke expertly and with great sympathy about the tragic rise of financial aggression and paranoia in veterans suffering from combat-related trauma. She described a textbook case of symptoms that perfectly mirrored the lies James and my mother had told on TV. It was a character assassination delivered with the serene, unassailable authority of a medical professional, and I knew with a certainty that made me feel sick that she was on their payroll. My phone, which had been a tool for my investigation, became a source of torment. Friends, former colleagues, even distant relatives started calling. Some offered unequivocal support, but many were hesitant, their questions laced with a new, cautious suspicion. "Hey, Marcus, just checking in. Is everything okay?" The unspoken question hung in the air like poison gas. "Are you okay?" The isolation was a physical weight. It was one thing to be betrayed by your family in the privacy of a lawyer's office. It was another to have them stand on a public stage and broadcast a twisted, ugly caricature of you to the entire world. They were systematically dismantling my reputation, my credibility, my very identity. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to take my name, my honor. I felt like I was trapped in a soundproof glass box. I could scream the truth, but no one could hear me. Everyone just saw the distorted reflection my family had, so skillfully created. It was the most effective kind of warfare, the kind that makes you, for a terrifying second, start to doubt your own sanity. The public smearing campaign was a low blow, a classic psychological warfare tactic designed to isolate and demoralize me. For a few days, it worked better than I would have liked to admit. I stopped answering my phone. I felt like a ghost in my own life, haunted by a version of myself I didn't recognize. I was drowning. But then a lifeline appeared from the most unexpected quarter. My burner phone rang. It was an unknown number, a local area code. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me to. "Is this Marcus Rowan?" a woman's voice asked. It was all business, crisp, professional, no nonsense. "Who's asking?" I replied, my own voice cautious. "My name is Detective Leela Washington. Financial Crimes Division, City Police. I've been looking into a series of sophisticated identity theft cases, all targeting local veterans. Your name and the name of your sister-in-law's charity, the Center for Restorative Futures, have come up more than once.
Hi.
I saw the news story about your family. It felt rehearsed. I was stunned into a rare silence. Cop who wasn't buying the performance. I can't officially investigate your family's civil dispute," she continued, her voice lowering slightly. "That's not my lane, but the cases I am working on seem to have a common thread leading right back to the front door of that charity. The victims are all older vets, many with spotless service records, who suddenly find their credit destroyed by loans they never took out and credit cards they never applied for. The paper trail is a deliberately tangled mess, but it's too much. Of a coincidence? I have a gut feeling your family's very public lawsuit might be a smokescreen, a way to discredit you before you figure something out and come to people like me." It was the first time in weeks that someone had looked at this whole twisted situation and seen what I saw. A carefully constructed, diabolical lie. The relief was so immense it almost buckled my knees. "What do you need, detective?" I asked, my voice filled with an emotion I couldn't name. "I need something concrete to legally link the charity to the fraud. Officially right now, all I have are whispers and a string of bad luck stories. I need a witness who can connect the dots, or a piece of internal documentation. You're on the inside of the family, even if you're on the outs. You might see something I can't." Her call was a shot of pure adrenaline to my soul. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The next day, armed with this new hope, I decided to track down the name from the anonymous note, Thomas Grant. It wasn't hard to find him. His address was in the phone book. He was an older man, a Vietnam vet, living in a small, run-down apartment on the other side of town, a world away from my family's manicured lawns. When I knocked on his door, he opened it a crack, his eyes weary and deeply suspicious. "Shh. The guy from the TV," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't say it with malice, just a tired resignation, the one they're all calling crazy. "I'm the guy who got a note with your name on it," I said, holding up the bank memo so he could see it. "It says you've been having some trouble." He sighed a long, rattling sound and opened the door wider. "Might as well come in," he said. "The whole world knows my business anyway." His apartment was small, but neat, cluttered with the artifacts of a life of service, framed medals on the wall, a photo of a handsome young man in a crisp army uniform, and on the kitchen table, angry-looking stacks of bills and collection notices. He told me his story. A year ago, his wife had passed away, and the medical bills had piled up. He'd seen a flyer for Vanessa's charity at the local VFW hall. He went to them desperate, looking for help navigating the VA bureaucracy. They were charming, he said. So helpful. They took all his information, his social security number, date of birth, his DD-214 service record. They promised him the world. A few months later, his life fell apart. Credit cards he'd never applied for started showing up in the mail, already maxed out. He was denied a small car loan. Then the collection agencies started calling at all hours of the day and night. He was on the verge of being evicted from the apartment he'd lived in for 20 years. "They act like your best friend," he said, his voice thick with a quiet, burning anger. "That woman Vanessa, she looks you right in the eye, puts a hand on your arm, and promises you that you're not forgotten. And all the while, she's picking your pocket and stealing your good name." As I listened to this proud old soldier describe his humiliation, my personal feeling of betrayal began to transform into a cold, righteous fury. This wasn't just about me and my inheritance anymore. It was about men like Thomas Grant, men who had served their country, who had written a blank check to the nation, only to be preyed upon by the lowest form of vulture, the kind that wears a mask of compassion. I left Thomas Grant's apartment with a new, hardened resolve. I had a name. I had a victim willing to speak. And I had a cop who was ready to listen. The tide wasn't just turning. I was about to turn it into a tsunami, the first-hand account. From Thomas Grant, Sophia Chin finally had the key she needed. It was the human element, the starting point, that allowed her to untangle the web of digital lies. It was like a single thread that, once pulled, began to unravel a massive, tangled, and ugly tapestry. She went into a state of near seclusion, working for 48 hours straight, fueled by nothing but black coffee and a cold fury that I recognized all too well. It was the fury of an orderly mind forced to witness a chaotic and unjust system. Then she called me on my burner phone. "Meet me at my office now," she said. Her voice was stripped of all pleasantries, and come alone. I went to her anonymous office, tucked away in a nondescript building that prided itself on its tenants' privacy. The room was dark, the blinds drawn, the only light coming from the glow of 3 large monitors. They were covered in a dizzying array of flowcharts, bank statements, encrypted file names, and lines of code. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream board, but I knew every single point on it was a verified source fact. "Your family's lawsuit is a joke," Sophia began without even saying hello. She was pacing in front of the screens like a caged tiger. "It's a beautifully executed piece of misdirection, but it's a distraction." This, she gestured with a sweep of her arm to the glowing monitors. "This is the real story." She walked me through it, her words sharp and precise. It was bigger, uglier, and more sophisticated than I could have ever imagined. Vanessa's charity, the Center for Restorative Futures, was nothing more than a high-tech data mining operation. It was a Trojan horse. It used the promise of help and the patriotic branding to collect the most sensitive, personal, and financial information from hundreds of vulnerable veterans like Thomas Grant. That data was then bundled and funneled directly to a secure server at James' company, Stone Ridge Tech. "James isn't just a small-time tech bro dabbling in fraud," Sophia explained, pointing to a complex diagram that showed the flow of information. "He's a professional identity launderer, and he's good at it. He uses the stolen veteran identities to create what are called synthetic identities, ghost profiles. He combines real, verifiable information, like a social security number, with fake details. With these nearly untraceable profiles, he establishes credit, takes out massive loans, and opens dozens of commercial bank accounts. My stomach turned. They were using the honor and good credit of American veterans as the raw material for a massive criminal enterprise. But where does the money go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What's the point of all this? The billion-dollar question, isn't it? She said. She clicked her mouse and a new window opened, displaying a long list of international wire transfers. Most of it, after being washed through a dozen shell corporations, ends up here, she pointed. To the final recipient, a holding company based in the Cayman Islands, named Virex Holdings. Yeah. But that's not the worst part, Marcus. She pulled up another file. It was a simple spreadsheet, but it felt like the coldest thing in the room. It was a list of names. These are the identities they've stolen. We've positively identified over 200 so far. Most of them are still alive, like Mr. Grant. But some of them, her voice trailed off. I scanned the list, my eyes moving down the column, and then they stopped. The air left my lungs in a painful, ragged gasp. Captain Oliver Grant, no relation. To Thomas Grant, he was my company commander on my first tour in Afghanistan. A good man, a brilliant leader, the kind of officer who would eat last. He died in 2012, killed by an IED that nearly took me with him. I still had a piece of shrapnel in my left shoulder from that day, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice. They're using the identities of the dead, I whispered. The words felt like sacrilege in my mouth, like it was a desecration of a memory I held as sacred. The dead can't report identity theft, Sophia said softly, her voice filled with a rare gentleness. They can't get a credit alert on their phone. They're the perfect silent victims. I stood there staring at my friend's name on that screen, and something inside me broke. The personal anger, the sting of family betrayal, it all melted away and recrystallized into a single, diamond-hard point of purpose. This was no longer a family dispute. It wasn't about a house or an inheritance or my father's complicated approval. This was about honor. It was about protecting the legacy of men like Oliver Grant, men who had given everything for their country. I finally looked away from the screen and met Sophia's gaze. The lawsuit, I said, my voice cold and clear as ice. You said it was a distraction. We're going to use it against them. I don't care about winning the case anymore. I don't care about the house. The courtroom is going to be their stage, and we're going to make them perform. The name Virex Holdings echoed in my head long after I left Sophia's office. It felt too clean, too corporate, and anonymous for a simple money laundering destination. My gut, an instinct honed by 20 years of threat analysis and recognizing patterns where others saw chaos, was screaming at me. There was another layer to this, a layer darker than simple greed. I knew I couldn't move forward without more information. This was beyond the scope of a forensic accountant or a city detective. I needed military intelligence, used my secure line to contact my old commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Winters. She was now a high-ranking official at the Pentagon, a woman who navigated the labyrinthine corridors of power with a grace and toughness I'd always admired. Sarah, it's Marcus, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. I need to ask you about a name. And this conversation never happened. It's a long shot. It's always a long shot with you, Marcus, she replied, a hint of warmth in her voice. Go ahead. Virex Holdings. There was a long, profound pause on the other end of the line. It was the kind of loaded silence that tells you more than 1,000 words ever could. It was the silence of a recognized threat. Marcus, where in God's name? Did you hear that name? Her voice had lost all its friendly warmth. It was now pure professional steel. It was the voice she used in a command center when things were going wrong. It's the primary destination for funds from a large-scale fraud operation I've uncovered. An operation run by my brother and his wife. Another pause, this one even heavier. I could almost hear her processing the implications. Marcus, listen. To me very carefully. Virex is not just a holding company. It's a known front, a a very sophisticated, very well-funded front for a foreign intelligence agency. They don't buy companies, they buy access. They specialize in acquiring sensitive technology, intellectual property, and classified data from the West. If your brother is funneling money to them, it's almost certainly not just money they're interested in. The final horrifying pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening certainty. The stolen identities, the careful selection of veterans, they weren't just chosen because they were vulnerable. They chose specific targets, I said, the words coming out in a rush as the realization dawned. The list is full of veterans with high-level security clearances, engineers, intelligence analysts, systems administrators, even after they retire or pass away. Their digital footprint, their old credentials, can sometimes be reactivated or used to bypass security protocols and the systems of the defense contractors they used to work for. They're not just stealing money, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice grim and low. They're selling access. They're selling digital keys to the kingdom. One of those identities in the wrong hands could compromise a weapon system or a piece of critical infrastructure. This has just escalated from a major felony to a critical national security threat. You need to understand the danger you are in. These people do not play games. They don't leave loose ends. It's the weight of her words settled on me like a lead blanket. This had spiraled into something I could never have imagined in my worst nightmares. My own brother, my sister-in-law, tangled up in espionage. Whether they were willing, treasonous participants, or just greedy, useful idiots didn't matter. They were acting as tools for an enemy of the United States. Sarah promised to start a quiet internal investigation to look at Virex from her end, but she warned me it would be slow and wrapped in layers of bureaucratic red tape. The official channels are a quagmire, Marcus, she said. Whatever you're going to do, you're likely on your own for the immediate future. Watch your six. I mean it. I hung up the phone, a cold dread washing over me that had nothing to do with my family's lawsuit. This was no longer a fight I could afford to lose. It wasn't just about my honor or Thomas Grant's good name anymore. It was about preventing a catastrophic breach of the country's security, orchestrated from my own hometown by my own family. Armed with the horrifying truth about Virex, my lawyer and I refocused our strategy for the civil trial. We knew we couldn't walk in and accuse my family of treason. We had no admissible proof, and the claim was so fantastic it would make me look like the paranoid one they were painting me as. The plan had to be more subtle. We would use the clear-cut evidence of the charity fraud, the testimony of men like Thomas Grant, to methodically back Vanessa into a corner on the witness stand and force her to lie under oath. It was a clean, simple, and elegant legal trap. And 2 days before the trial, it fell apart completely. James and Vanessa, guided by their ruthless lawyer, Victoria Chambers, played their trump card. Chambers filed an emergency motion to suppress our key evidence. She argued with theatrical outrage that the financial data Sophia had so painstakingly uncovered was the fruit of a poisonous tree. She claimed it must have been obtained through illegal digital surveillance of her clients. She had no proof, of course, but her motion was so aggressive, so filled with accusations of my known military-level cyber skills, that it spooked the judge. The judge, a cautious man nearing retirement, didn't want a messy, controversial case on his hands. He didn't throw the evidence out entirely, but he ruled that it could not be presented until a separate future. Hearing could be held to determine its legality, a hearing that would take place months after the current trial was over. In a single stroke of a pen, they had disarmed me. Sophia's mountain of evidence was now just a pile of useless paper. At the exact same time, they sprang their other trap. They produced a sworn affidavit from a man named Kevin Morris, a former Army private, with a known history of psychological issues and petty crime. In the affidavit, Morris tearfully claimed that I had approached him outside a VA clinic, offered him $5,000, and tried to get him to lie about Vanessa's charity for my lawsuit. To make it worse, they had a secretly recorded audio clip. It was only a few seconds long, cleverly edited from a longer, innocent conversation. But in it, I could be heard saying, "You do this for me, and I'll make it worth your while." It was a lie, a distortion, but it was powerfully convincing. It was a devastating 1-2 punch. My evidence was sidelined, and I was now painted not just as unstable, but as a manipulative monster who coerces vulnerable veterans. My lawyer, David, called me that evening. The usual confidence was gone from his voice, replaced by a strained weariness. "Marcus, we're in deep trouble," he said bluntly. "They've boxed us in. Without Sophia's data, it's your word against theirs. And they've just taken a blowtorch to your word. I don't see a clear path to victory here." I hung up the phone and stared out my apartment window at the city lights. The feeling that washed over me was one of utter, crushing defeat. For the first time in this entire fight, I felt true, gut-wrenching despair. I had the truth. I knew what they were. But the system, the very system of laws and justice I had sworn to uphold, was being twisted into a weapon and used against me. They were going to win. It would walk away with my father's house, my inheritance, and my honor. They would leave me a broken man with a ruined reputation while their treasonous operation continued to hum along in the shadows. I sat in my apartment for hours, the legal documents spread out on my table like a map of my own defeat. I thought about giving up. Maybe I should just walk away, get in my car, and drive until I ran out of road. Start over somewhere no one knew my name. The fight felt too big. The enemy too powerful and too insidious. They had my family. They had the media, and now they had the law on their side. I was alone, outgunned, and for the first time, I was genuinely, profoundly afraid I was going to lose. Trial. I woke up before dawn. The despair of the night before had cooled into something else, something hard and brittle. I thought of my father's words about having a spine of steel. I thought of Captain Oliver Grant and the promises you make to the dead. I thought of Thomas Grant and the quiet dignity he refused to let them take. I wasn't going to run. I was going. To fight, I put on my best suit. A dark charcoal gray that I'd bought for my father's funeral felt like armor. As I knotted my tie and looked at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see the defeated man from the night before. I saw a soldier heading into his most important battle, armed with nothing but a desperate long-shot plan. It was all I had left. The courtroom was even more imposing in person than on television. All dark wood, high ceilings, and a silence that felt heavy and judgmental. My family was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table. James caught my eye and gave me a slow, triumphant smirk. Vanessa looked serene and beautiful, a picture of wronged innocence, occasionally whispering to James and patting his hand. And my mother wouldn't look at me at all. She just stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap they were bloodless. They looked like the perfect grieving family, forced into this ugly business to deal with their troubled, wayward son. My lawyer, a good man named David Feldman, gave my shoulder a firm squeeze as I sat down. "Deep breaths, Marcus," he whispered. "Remember the plan. Can't use the financial data, but we can still go after their credibility. We just need to create reasonable doubt. We just need one of them to slip up." The day was a long, grueling blur of legal arguments and carefully worded testimony. Victoria Chambers, their lawyer, was a shark in a designer suit. She was brilliant. She called my mother to the stand first and gently guided her through a tearful, heartbreaking performance about my troubling behavior after my father's death. She called James, who spoke with grave concern about my paranoia and aggression. She submitted the affidavit from Kevin Morris, and it was entered into the record. She was building a cage of lies around me, bar by methodical bar. When she was done, she rested her case. There was a heavy silence in the room. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, looked over his glasses at me, and his expression was not one of anger, but of something worse, pity. It was clear which way the wind was blowing. He saw a decorated veteran who had sadly lost his way and a family trying to do the right thing. "Mr. Rowan," the judge said, his voice gentle, "your family has presented a very compelling and concerning case. Do you have anything to say in your defense before I consider their request for a protective order and financial guardianship?" Was it my one and only shot? I stood up, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. David, my lawyer, looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to abandon the defensive plan. It was time to attack. I looked past the judge, past the lawyers, and directly at my family. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out with a clarity that surprised even me. "My family is right about one thing. I have been changed by my service." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. It taught me that some lines can never, ever be crossed. And it taught me how to recognize an enemy even when they are sitting right in front of you. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom at my words. The judge's tired eyes sharpened with a flicker of interest. My lawyer, David, rose to his feet, sensing the shift. The judge had given us an opening, and we were about to drive a truck through it. "Your Honor," David said, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to my own charge statement. "We will not waste the court's time by addressing the baseless and offensive claims regarding my client's mental state. Instead, we would like to call a witness to the stand to speak to the character and business practices of the plaintiff, Mrs. Vanessa Rowan." Victoria Chambers was on her feet in an instant. "Objection. This is a hearing about a protective order and family matters. Not a business audit. This is irrelevant." "I'll be the judge of what's relevant, counselor," the judge said, his voice dry. The flicker of curiosity in his eyes had grown. "Overruled. I'll allow it, but make your point quickly." "The defense calls Mr. Thomas Grant to the stand," David announced. Thomas Grant walked slowly but steadily to the witness stand. He looked small and frail under the high ceilings and imposing crest on the wall. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. David gently led him through his story, his service in Vietnam, the loss of his wife, his financial struggles, and his desperate visit to the Center for Restorative Futures. Then David asked the first key question. "Mr. Grant, after you provided Mrs. Rowan's charity with all of your personal and financial information, did you ever receive any financial assistance, counseling, or job placement services from them?" "No, sir," Thomas said clearly. "Not a thing. They took all my paperwork, said they'd be in touch. I never heard from them again. The next thing I knew, collection agencies were calling me about credit cards I never even had." "Next," David called. "Two more veterans to the stand, a man and a woman, both in their 60s. Each one told the same story. A depressingly similar tale of promises made and broken, of information given in good faith and never used for their benefit. A pattern was emerging, a clear, undeniable pattern of data collection without any corresponding charitable action. The final witness was a surprise even to me. David called a woman named Carol, a prim and proper bookkeeper from a major local corporation that was one of the biggest public donors to Vanessa's charity. He showed her a glossy brochure. "Can you identify this document, ma'am?" "Yes," she said. "That's the 2023 annual report from the Center for Restorative Futures. We receive one every year. It's very impressive. And your company's substantial annual donation decisions are based on the contents of this report, correct? On the number of veterans it claims to have helped and the services it claims to provide, yes? That's correct. We have a corporate responsibility to ensure our donations are being used effectively." David turned his attention to my family's table. Vanessa was starting to look less serene. A tight, angry line had formed around her perfectly lipsticked mouth. James was whispering furiously in her ear, but she shook her head, trying to maintain her mask of calm. But I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. The trap was set. The pieces were all meticulously placed on the board. All that was left was for the Queen to make her move. "The defense calls Mrs. Vanessa Rowan to the stand," David announced into the charged silence.
"Ow."
A wave of shocked murmurs went through the courtroom gallery. Putting a plaintiff on the stand in their own protective order hearing was a bold, aggressive move. Victoria Chambers objected fiercely, arguing that her client had already been through enough, but the judge, now thoroughly hooked, waved her off. "She is a plaintiff in this matter. She can be called proceed." Vanessa walked to the stand, a vision of wronged elegance. She smoothed her skirt, adjusted the microphone, and gave the judge a small, brave smile. She was an actress, giving the performance of her life. David approached her, holding the glossy annual report. His demeanor was polite, almost deferential. Mrs. Rowan, he began, his voice soft, you are the founder and executive director of the Center for Restorative Futures. Is that correct? Yes, it is, she said, her voice dripping with a false humility that was more arrogant than any boast. And this is your 2023 annual report, a document you create, approve, and send to your generous donors and file with the government. Yes, it's a beautiful report, David said, flipping through the pages. The photos are wonderful. So many success stories. So many veterans helped. He stopped on a page in the middle. It lists here, for example, that you provided comprehensive financial counseling and debt relief to over 50 local veterans last year alone. Is that an accurate statement? Yes, we have a very successful program, Vanessa said, lifting her chin slightly. We're very proud of it. And would Mr. Thomas Grant be one of those success stories? David asked, his tone still mild. Hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I'd have to check the specific files, she said coolly. His name does sound familiar. What about Mr. Harris or Mrs. Chen, the two other individuals who just testified? Were they part of this successful program that you're so proud of? The trap was closing? Vanessa glanced at her lawyer, who could do nothing but sit there, her face a thundercloud. She looked at James, whose face had gone from smug to a pale, waxy white. She was on her own in the spotlight, and she knew it. As I said, we have helped hundreds of veterans over the years, she said, her voice becoming clipped and defensive. I can't be expected to recall every single name off the top of my head. David took one step closer to the witness box. His voice dropped, becoming quiet, but it seemed to magnify in the silent room. Mrs. Rowan, let me ask you one final simple question. Under oath, before this court and God, are you prepared to state that this document, he held up the report, like a prosecutor holding up a murder weapon, is a truthful and accurate representation of your charity's activities? Are you prepared to swear that the men and women listed in here as having received aid, including the 3 who just testified under oath that they received nothing, were in fact helped by you? This was the moment. The entire case, my entire future, balanced on her next word. She had an out. She could have said there were clerical errors. She could have blamed a subordinate for poor record-keeping. It would have been a blow, but she might have survived it. But her pride, her staggering, unshakable arrogance wouldn't let her. She saw it as a challenge to her authority, to her perfect image. She lifted her chin, looked David straight in the eye, and her voice was hard and defiant as she said, Yes, it is completely accurate. A dead silence fell over the courtroom. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. David didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply turned to the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with quiet, deadly triumph. The witness has just committed perjury right here on the stand. We have sworn testimony from multiple witnesses' testimony. The court itself has just heard that directly and unequivocally contradicts this official filed report. This is no longer a family dispute. This is direct evidence of systematic criminal fraud and now felony perjury. The judge stared at Vanessa, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at the annual report in David's hand, then at the faces of Thomas Grant and the other veterans in the gallery. He looked at me, and for the first time, I knew he saw the truth. He banged his gavel, and the sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. This hearing is suspended, he announced, his voice booming with an authority he hadn't shown all day. Based on the testimony presented here today, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation into the activities of the Center for Restorative Futures and its director. We are done here. It wasn't a dramatic FBI raid with flashing lights. It was something far more satisfying. It was the quiet, methodical, and undeniable collapse of their entire world. Brought down not by my accusations, but by the weight of their own monumental lies. The aftermath of the judge's ruling was pure, unadulterated chaos. As his final words echoed in the courtroom, Vanessa's mask of composure didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. Her face went slack with shock, then twisted into an ugly snarl of disbelief. She started to say something, but no words came out. James leaped to his feet, yelling not at me, but at their lawyer, Victoria Chambers. who was already packing her expensive leather briefcase with a grim, emotionless efficiency. She was a hired gun. The battle was lost, and she was done. Reporters, who had been lazily taking notes on what they thought was a boring family court matter, were now scrambling over benches, shouting questions, their phones held up like weapons. My family was quickly escorted out a side door by two bailiffs, shielded from the burgeoning media storm. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. In the space of 5 minutes, they had gone from being the victims to the villains of the story. The news broke that evening, and it broke big. The narrative shifted instantly and seismically. It wasn't about a family squabble anymore. The headlines were about charity fraud, perjury, and a beloved local nonprofit being a potential sham. The story of the unstable veteran was dead and buried, replaced by the story of the whistleblower hero who exposed corruption from within his own family. A few weeks later, the other shoe dropped, and it was a steel-toed boot. The district attorney's investigation, now armed with the evidence Sophia had been waiting to legally provide, quickly uncovered the vast scope of the financial fraud. And when they saw the name Virex Holdings in the offshore transfers, they did the right thing. They called the FBI. The case was taken over by the federal government. The quiet work Sarah Winters had been doing at the Pentagon now connected with the local investigation, creating a complete, horrifying picture. One morning, I watched on the national news as FBI agents in tactical gear raided the sleek, glass-walled offices of Stone Ridge Tech and the more modest headquarters of the Center for Restorative Futures. They carried out box after box of documents and dozens of computer hard drives. Later that day, James and Vanessa were arrested at their home. The charges were staggering: a laundry list that included wire fraud, money laundering, aggravated identity theft, and, as the federal prosecutor ominously noted in his press conference, an ongoing investigation into conspiracy to commit espionage. The night after the arrest, I got one phone call. It was from the county jail. Almost didn't answer, but I did. Marcus. It was James's voice, but it was a voice I'd never heard from him before. It was small, thin, and stripped of all its lifelong arrogance. It was the voice of a terrified boy. "What do you want, James?" I asked, my own voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It was her," he whispered, his voice cracking with a sob. "All Vanessa. She came to me with the whole plan. She knew about Virex. She told me it was just a client, a rich international client who valued extreme privacy. I didn't know, Mark. I swear to God, I didn't know what it was really about. Pushed for everything. The lawsuit, the media smear. She said it was the only way to keep you quiet, to keep you from digging. She twisted me up. They made me do it." I listened to him, to the pathetic, sniveling excuses of a man who had been a wolf a month ago and was now a frightened, bleeding sheep. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he was just a greedy, weak-willed fool who had been played by a master manipulator. In the end, it didn't matter. He'd made his choices, every single one of them. "Goodbye, James," I said, and for the first and final time, I hung up the phone on my brother. The last loose end wasn't a legal one. It was a personal one. My mother, a week after James's arrest, her lawyer a new one, sad-looking man who specialized in damage control, arranged a meeting. We met in a sterile, anonymous conference room in his office building. It had the same stale air and polished table as Gerald Hayes' office, the place where this whole thing had started. The symmetry was not lost on me. She looked a decade older. The fight, the self-righteous indignation, it had all gone out of her. She had spent her entire life orbiting around her golden child. And now his light had been extinguished in the cold darkness of a federal holding cell. Her universe had collapsed. She cried as soon as I walked in. She told me she was sorry. Said she never knew the extent of it, that James had told her I was in trouble, that I had gambling debts. He was only trying to protect the family assets from my problems and creditors. It was a well-rehearsed, pitiful story. I listened, but I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, empty distance, like looking at a stranger across a canyon. The time for her apologies, for her excuses, had long since passed. "Why did you do it, Mom?" I asked, my voice quiet but cutting through her sobs. "Forget the business? Why did you go on television?" Why did you sit there in front of the entire world and tell them your son was crazy? Her tears stopped abruptly. Her head snapped up, and for a fleeting, terrible moment, I saw a flash of the old resentment, the deep, abiding bitterness that had been there all along. Because he was here, she said, her voice rising, suddenly sharp and strong. He was always here. He took care of things, ran a business. He came for dinner on Sundays. He stayed. You left. You were never here, Marcus. Never. Always off somewhere. Else, playing soldier in some desert. Never calling. Never visiting. James was the one who was a good son. James was the one who did what a son is supposed to do. And there it was, the unvarnished, ugly truth. It wasn't that she was tricked. It was that she had made a choice. She chose the son who fit her picture-perfect image of what a son should be, the one who stayed close, who ran a business, who gave her the appearance of a perfect, successful family. My independence, my career, my entire life had been an unspoken rejection of that image, and she had never forgiven me for it. She didn't stand by James because she believed his lies. She stood by him because she believed in his version of the world, a version in which I had no place. I stood up. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a cashier's check. It was for the small amount of money they had offered. Me in that first meeting, the token of appreciation. I slid it across the table toward her. "This is for your legal fees," I said, my voice as calm and final as a judge's gavel. "Don't contact me again." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her choices and the ruins of the perfect family she had prized above all else. I didn't look back. The door closed, and with it, a final, painful, and necessary chapter of my life. Year later, the world looks different. The churning anger in my gut has mostly faded, replaced by a sense of quiet, steady purpose. The legal battles are finally over. James, facing the mountain of evidence against him, took a plea deal. He testified against Vanessa, his former partner in crime, to get a reduced sentence. He'll still be in a federal prison for a very long time. Vanessa, the true architect of the scheme, in her boundless arrogance, fought the charges to the bitter. And lost spectacularly. She'll likely never be a free woman again. With a portion of the assets recovered by the government's Victim Restitution Fund and some of my own savings, I started something new. I didn't want the money for myself, felt tainted. So I used it to found the Honor Trace Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to a single, clear mission, helping veterans protect themselves from the very financial predators and scams that had almost destroyed me and had successfully ruined good men like Thomas Grant. Our office is small, located in a modest building downtown, but it's always busy. We're a small team, a band of misfits brought together by a common cause. Sophia Chin is our CFO. It's volunteering her time 2 days a week to build a financial fortress for our clients and teach them about fiscal responsibility. Detective Leela Washington, now happily retired from the force, is our lead investigator and fraud specialist, teaching veterans how to spot red flags and protect their digital identities. And Thomas Grant, his own finances now restored, is our Director of Outreach, his own powerful story, which he now tells with strength and without shame. It's a testament to why our work is so desperately needed. Today, we were helping a young Marine just back from her first deployment to Okinawa. She was sharp, tough, but her eyes were full of shame. She'd been targeted by a sophisticated phishing scam, an email that looked like it was from the Department of Defense, promising a special veterans transition bonus. It had drained her entire bank account, every penny she had saved. "I can't believe I fell for it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I feel so stupid. I'm trained to spot IEDs, but I couldn't spot a fake email." "You're not stupid," I told her, my voice gentle but firm. "You were trained to follow procedures, to trust your chain of command. They exploit that. They use the AE. Best parts of us are discipline, our trust, our sense of duty against us. But you're not alone in this. We're going to help you fight back." Layla sat with her, patiently walking her through the process of reporting the fraud to the federal authorities. Sophia was already on the phone with the bank's fraud department, her voice a firm, undeniable authority that bulldozed through corporate red tape. Seeing my team in action, Seeing the look of hope slowly and cautiously return to that young Marine's face, that was a victory more real and more satisfying than any courtroom drama. It was tangible. It was constructive. We were building something. Instead of just tearing something down, we were standing watch for those who had stood watch for all of us. Some wounds heal in ways you don't expect. Some victories are quiet. One afternoon, months after the foundation was up and running, an email popped up in my personal inbox. The sender was Colonel Sarah Winters. I hadn't spoken to her directly since the feds officially took over the case. Our previous communications had been discreet, off the record. This was the first time she had used an official channel. The subject line was blank. With a sense of trepidation, I clicked it open. Body of the email was characteristically brief, containing only one sentence. Her preliminary intel on the Virex network was instrumental in rolling up a hostile intelligence operation we've been chasing for 5 years. Good work, Major. My breath caught in my chest. There was no official commendation, no medal, no public recognition. There couldn't be. My involvement was unofficial. A footnote buried so deep in the classified history of the case that it would never see the light of day. But that one sentence, that quiet acknowledgement from a soldier I respected more than anyone on the planet, felt more valuable than any public award. It was a validation of my instincts, my training, and the terrible choices I had been forced to make. It was a quiet mission accomplished, from a world I had left behind, but that would always be a part of who I am. Later that week, another piece of the past arrived. This time in a small, dusty cardboard box. It was from the lawyer who was now the executive of my father's estate. Apparently, it had been found at the back of a storage closet in my parents' house during the clean-out before it was sold. Personal effects of Richard Rowan, the attached note said. I opened it cautiously, not sure what to expect. Inside was a collection of my father's small treasures, old, rusted fishing lures, a faded Baltimore Orioles baseball cap, a bundle of letters from his own time in the Army tied with a brittle string, and beneath them, tucked into a corner, was a single sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, spiky, all-caps handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I slid my finger under the flap. It was a letter dated a week after I'd left for basic training all those years ago. It was clear he had written it, but had never found the words or the courage to send it. Marcus, it began, I know I am not an easy man to be a son to. I don't say the right things. I see your mother coddling James, and it makes me worry for him, so I am hard on you, too hard. I know that the world is a tough place, son. It will do its best to break your spine. I am hard on you because I know you have a spine of steel. And I guess, in my own clumsy way, I think I'm tempering it. I see the strength in you that I wish I saw in your brother. I hope someday you can. Forgive my clumsy ways of showing it. Know this. Wherever you go and whatever you do, you make me proud. I read the letter 3 times, the ink blurring through the tears that were now streaming down my face. It wasn't an excuse for his distance, but it was an explanation. It was the other half of the conversation we'd had on the porch that night. It was the final piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. The house, the money, the inheritance, none of it mattered anymore. I had my father's last words, and that was an inheritance no one, not even my own family, could ever take away from me. Last Saturday, the air was warm and smelled of freshly cut grass and charcoal smoke. I was standing in the backyard of the small, unassuming house I'd bought after everything had finally settled down. The sound filling the yard was something I hadn't heard in a long, long time. Easy, uncomplicated laughter. Mike Daniels was at the grill, engaged in a passionate, friendly argument with Sophia Chin about the proper way to sear a steak. I think he was losing. Layla Washington, my detective friend, was telling a story about her early days as a beat cop that had Thomas Grant roaring with a deep belly laugh. I'd never heard from him before. My lawyer David was there with his wife, watching his 2 young kids chase a soccer ball across the lawn. This was my new family. A strange patchwork group of people forged in the fires of a shared crisis. A forensic accountant, a computer, genius, a retired cop, a tough old vet, and a good lawyer who believed me when no one else would. They weren't bound to me by blood or a shared last name. They were bound by something stronger, loyalty and a shared fight for what was right. They had stood by me when my own family had tried to tear me down and leave me for dead. Sophia brought me a plate with a perfectly cooked steak. Not bad for a data geek, huh? Oh, she said with a grin, gesturing with her head toward Mike. Don't let him hear you say that, I joked back. His ego is already a national security risk. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the fireflies started their nightly dance just like they had at my childhood home. I sat back in a lawn chair with a cold beer and just watched them. I watched these good people, my friends, sharing a meal and enjoying a peaceful evening. There was no tension, no hidden agendas, no bitter unspoken history. There was just a simple, comfortable, and powerful sense of belonging. I thought about the letter from my dad, about his hope that I would have a spine of steel. I think he would have been proud, not just because I won the fight, but because of what I chose to build in its aftermath. I had lost the family I was born into, but in its place, I had found something better, something stronger, a family defined not by blood but by choice, not by obligation but by respect, not by history but by honor. And as I sat there listening to the easy laughter echo in the twilight, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money or inheritance could ever buy. I was home. Finally and truly home. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a reminder that sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly saves you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between your family and what was right? I'd be interested to hear your story. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.